Today, we're going to talk about something a little different. We're going to look at the villains of progress. Not people, but ideas. Philosophies so bad, they literally stop us from discovering new things.
So let me ask you this. Can an idea be dangerous? I mean, we usually think of ideas as these abstract, harmless things floating around in our heads. But what if some ways of thinking, some philosophies, are more like poison for the mind? What if they actually prevent us from making progress? Well, according to the physicist and philosopher David Deutsch, that's not just a what-if, it's a reality. He points to 3 specific philosophies that have acted like giant roadblocks for science and knowledge. And today, we're going to meet these 3 villains and figure out how to beat them. All right, let's start with our first villain. This one is a real classic, the kind of thing you might have thought about late at night, staring at the ceiling. It's the ultimate trap of self-obsession, solipsism. The idea here is pretty wild. It's the belief that you, yes, you, listening to this right now, are the only real thing in the universe. Everything else, your friends, your family, the sun, the moon, me, it's all just a complex dream happening inside your mind. It's like the Matrix, but instead of machines, the architect of the whole thing is, well, you. Now, David Deutsch calls this a paradigmatic bad explanation. And you might be wondering why. Well, it's because it explains absolutely everything, which means it actually explains nothing. If a star is suddenly vanished from the sky, the solipsist would just say, oh, my mind decided to undream it. There's no way to prove it wrong, so it has 0 predictive power. It's totally useless.
And here's where the whole idea just kind of collapses on itself. Okay, so let's say it is all a dream. Fine. But you have to admit it's a really consistent dream, right? There are rules. Gravity works the same way every day. People behave in predictable ways. So your mind has to be dreaming up a complete functioning set of physical laws. At that point, you're basically just describing realism, but with this extra totally unnecessary layer of saying, and it's all in my head.
So here's why it's a villain. It's not just a quirky, wrong idea, it's actively harmful. Because it's so flexible, you can never be wrong. And if you can never be wrong, you can never learn. It completely shuts down the engine of progress, which is finding our mistakes and fixing them. If there's no objective reality to test our ideas against, well, we're just stuck.
Okay, on to villain number 2. Now, this one is much more subtle and, honestly, way more common in the real world, especially in science. It's a philosophy that essentially tells us to put on a blindfold and stop being so curious. It's called instrumentalism. So what instrumentalism says is that the whole point of science isn't to figure out what's really going on in the universe. Nope, it's just about creating theories that are useful tools for making predictions. You see this a lot with AI models today, right? As long as the algorithm works and gives us the right answer, who cares how it's thinking? But that who cares attitude can be a massive blind spot.
There's a famous phrase that perfectly captures this idea. Shut up and calculate. It's this attitude that discourages us from asking the biggest, most important question of all. What is actually happening here? It tells scientists, hey, don't worry your pretty little head about reality. Just do the math. The equations work and that's all that matters. And the damage this has caused is very, very real. Deutsch argues that this exact shut up and calculate philosophy, which was part of the Copenhagen interpretation, stalled any real deep progress in quantum physics for decades. It's a philosophy born from a fear of being wrong. If you just stick to the predictions, you can't be proven wrong about what reality is. But the flip side is you can never be profoundly right either. And that brings us to our third and final villain. This one might be the most shocking, because at first glance, it sounds like the very definition of good science. But when taken to its extreme, it creates this powerful and very wrong illusion. We're talking about strong empiricism. Now, the core idea here seems super simple and obvious. All knowledge comes from our senses, right? We look at the world, we gather data, and from that data, we build our theories. It makes perfect sense, doesn't it? We see, we hear, we touch, and therefore we know. But Deutsch argues this is completely backwards. He flips the whole thing on its head. Knowledge doesn't start with data. It starts with a guess, a creative conjecture. Think about it. Einstein didn't just look at a bunch of data and derive the theory of relativity. He had to imagine it first, this wild, creative idea. Only then could he use data to test it. Our senses aren't the source of our ideas. They're the judge and jury for them. So here's the core problem. Empiricism was a great step forward because it tried to get away from old authorities like kings or priests telling us what's true.
But in the process, it just created two new false authorities: our senses, which we know can be fooled, and this mythical idea of deriving theories from data, which just isn't how creativity works. So, we've met the three villains: solipsism, instrumentalism, and empiricism. But if they're the problem, what's the solution? Who's the hero of this story that unlocks our potential for progress? Well, first, you have to realize that all three of these villains share the same fatal flaw. They are all forms of something called justificationism. That's a fancy word for a simple but mistaken idea: the search for ultimate proof or certainty. Each one is looking for a final, rock-solid authority for knowledge, whether that's your own mind, the math, or your senses. And the hero that rises to defeat justificationism is fallibilism. It's the simple, humble, and incredibly powerful idea that we might be wrong about everything, and that's okay. Instead of trying to prove our ideas are true, we should be working relentlessly to find the errors in them, because that's how we actually learn. That's how we grow. So the solution has two parts. The first part is that we should focus on creating good explanations. A good explanation is the total opposite of solipsism. It's rigid, it's hard to change. Think about the theory of evolution. You can't just say, well, maybe I'll take out the natural selection part. If you do, the whole thing falls apart. Every detail has a job to do. And the second part of the solution is to fully embrace fallibilism. We have to accept that even our very best ideas today are just conjectures. They're temporary. They're the best we've got for now. And our job isn't to worship them, but to constantly challenge them, criticize them, and look for ways to make them even better. And here is the amazing payoff. When we finally ditch these progress-blocking villains and instead commit ourselves to finding good explanations while always knowing we could be wrong, we open the door to unlimited growth. We create what Deutsch so beautifully called it in his book, The Beginning of Infinity. And that leaves us with one final big question to chew on. If these bad philosophies held back progress in the past, what are the bad explanations, the lazy ideas, the shut up and calculate attitudes holding us back right now? In our science, in our culture, and maybe even in our own lives. What do you think?